The Last Morse Code, Chapter 1, The Light on the Skein. How does a lighthouse, on an island with no power, send a message? And what do you do when that message, flashing over and over into the empty sea, is the name of a killer? This was the question that occupied the mind of Inspector Simeon Croft. It was not a frantic question, not a panicked one. It was a cold, heavy and methodical question, and it settled over him with the same deliberate weight as the sea fog clinging to the windows of the small police launch. The boat, the Osprey, cut a low, rumbling line through the grey, churning water. The chop of the North Sea was relentless, a dull, repetitive slap-thud against the hull. It was a rhythm of isolation. Croft pulled the collar of his heavy, damp wool coat tighter. He was a man who preferred the predictable grey pavement of the city, the logic of traffic and timetables. He did not care for the sea. It was too vast, too old, and it kept too many secrets. He was heading for the Skein. It was barely an island. It was a jagged tooth of black rock, jutting 3 miles from the coast, a place where the sea was always angry. For 100 years, it had held a lighthouse, a warning, but the lighthouse had been decommissioned a decade ago, its function replaced by satellites and automated buoys. It was, officially, a relic. But Thomas Anstey, the victim, had not seen it that way. The file on Croft's lap was thin. Anstey, 62, a man of quiet, independent wealth. He had bought the Skein and its lighthouse from the government for a pittance. He had called it a private hobby, a recluse, a man who preferred the company of gears, lenses, and the shriek of gulls to that of people. The call had come in from the local constabulary on the coast. A fishing boat, hauling its pots at dawn, had seen the light, not the steady, sweeping beam of a functioning lighthouse, but a frantic, repetitive flash. The fisherman, an old man who still remembered his maritime service, had recognized it, Morse code. He had recognized one word, a name. STAVROS. When the local constable, a young, pragmatic woman named Kale, had taken the launch out to investigate, she had found 2 things. First, she had found the body of Thomas Anstey. He was in the cottage at the base of the tower. He had been dead, the coroner estimated, for at least 12 hours. Second, she had found the impossibility. The main generator, the island's only source of power, was dead. Its fuel tank was empty. The backup batteries were corroded, green-furred monuments to decay. The island, as she put it in her stark radio report, was cold. And yet the light was flashing. The Osprey slowed, its engine dropping to a low, guttural thrum. Croft stepped out onto the iron-runged jetty, his feet landing on the slick, seaweed-covered stone. The air was thick, tasting of salt, rust, and cold rain. The wind was a constant, low moan, a sound that seemed to come from inside the rock itself. Constable Kale was waiting for him. She was wrapped in a heavy, waterproof coat, her face pale, her expression grim. She held a large, rubber torch, though the afternoon was still a flat, grey light. "Inspector Croft," she said, her voice clipped, professional, but Croft could hear the tremor beneath it. "It's just as I reported. I haven't touched anything." "The light," Croft said, his own voice a quiet counterpoint to the wind. "Is it still?" "Yes, sir." She didn't need to point. They both looked up. The lighthouse tower was a pillar of dark, sea-stained granite, rising 100 feet into the fog. And at the top, in the lantern room, the massive Fresnel lens was turning. Through the thick grey mist, the beam was not sharp, but it was visible. A hazy, white pulse. It swept past them, and as it did, a shutter, or something like it, interrupted the beam. Short, long, short, long, short, long, short, short, short. STAS. The timing was slightly off, the wind perhaps rattling the mechanism, or perhaps the machine was tired. "It's been doing that non-stop since before dawn," Kale said, her voice low. "Just that, over and over. Stavros, we don't have a Stavros on the mainland. Not one we can find. No fishing boats registered by that name. Nothing." "Show me the victim," Croft said. The keeper's cottage was connected to the base of the tower by a short, covered walkway. It was a round, stone structure built to withstand a century of storms. The air inside was cold, still, and smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old books. Thomas Anstey was sitting at a heavy oak desk. He was slumped forward, his head resting on an open logbook, as if he had simply fallen asleep while writing. His pipe lay cold in a heavy glass ashtray. His spectacles were still on. Croft moved slowly, his senses taking in the room. It was a place of obsessive order. Books on navigation, on lens grinding, on maritime history. A wall of meticulously organized tools. He looked at the body. No sign of violence, no obvious sign. His skin was pale, his lips blue. "The coroner's preliminary thought?" Croft asked, not looking at Cale, his gaze fixed on the man's peaceful, dead hand. "Heart failure, he suspects," Cale said, standing by the door, unwilling to come further in. He had a condition. We found his medication in the cabinet, but he's waiting for the full toxicology. He said it felt wrong, too neat." Croft nodded. A man with a heart condition, alone on a rock in a storm, it seems natural. "It did," Cale said, "until I went to check the generator." Croft looked at the open logbook. The last entry was in a neat, concise script. "Wind NNE force 7, barometer falling. The mechanism is complete. A final test tonight." "The mechanism," Croft murmured. "He was building something." "He was always building something, sir," Cale said. "He was a hobbyist, but, Inspector, he couldn't have built this." Croft left the body. He followed Cale through the small, clean kitchen and to a heavy iron door that led to the tower's base. This was the generator room. The smell of cold iron, diesel, and rust was thick. The generator, a massive green-painted diesel engine, sat silent. Croft ran a gloved hand over the engine block. It was as cold as the stone floor. He checked the fuel gauge. Empty. He opened the tank. The smell was faint, a mere memory of fuel. This hasn't run in days," Croft stated. "That's what I said," Cale replied. "And look." She shone her torch on the wall, a bank of massive glass jar batteries. The copper terminals were coated in a thick, powdery green corrosion. The acid levels were long gone. These are dead, sir. They've been dead for years. Anstey, he must have run the generator or nothing, and he was out of fuel." Croft stood in the absolute, cold silence of the engine room. Above him, he could hear the faint, rhythmic creak, creak, creak of the tower's massive lens assembly turning, and the soft, metallic click, 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 click of the shutter. The sounds were mechanical, not electrical. "How," Croft said, more to himself than to Cale, "do you turn a 100-year-old, 10-ton lens assembly without a motor?" "And how," Cale added, her voice a near whisper, "do you power a 1,000,000-candle power lamp without a generator?" Croft turned and began to climb. The lighthouse tower was a vertical column of cold, spiraling iron steps. The wind howled outside, a deafening, constant roar that vibrated through the stone. With every step, the rhythmic creak and click from above grew louder. He emerged into the lantern room. It was a vast, circular chamber of glass, brass, and iron. In the center, the Fresnel lens, a magnificent 8-foot-tall beehive of crystal, was rotating. It was moving with a slow, hypnotic, and perfectly steady grace. The massive lamp in its center was on, a beam of brilliant, pure white light so bright it was almost silent. The beam swept the room, and as it did, a heavy, black-painted shutter mechanism, like a giant eyelid, clicked shut and open, interrupting the light. "Short, long, short, long. STA." Croft stared not at the light, but at the base of the lens assembly. Where a powerful, humming electric motor should have been, there was something else. It was a clockwork. A massive, intricate, beautiful, and terrifying clockwork. It was a system of gears, cogs, and counterweights, like the inside of a giant's pocket watch. A massive, heavy cable ran from the main gear, down through a hole in the floor, presumably all the way to the tower's base. It's a weight-driven system," Croft breathed, his mind catching up to the reality. Like a grandfather clock, Anstey, he converted it. He retrofitted the original 19th-century mechanism. He wound it," Cale said, her voice filled with disbelief. This entire massive." "The mechanism is complete," Croft quoted the logbook. "A final test. But the clockwork, the gears, the creak, that only explained the turning. It did not explain the light. A clock cannot create electricity. Croft looked at the lamp. It was not a modern electric bulb. It was not the original burning oil lamp. It was something else. It was chemical, a brilliant white and cold light pulsing with a life of its own. It was not hot. It was ethereal. And on the desk, in the corner of the lantern room, sat a second logbook. This one was technical. It was filled with chemical formulas, equations, notes on phosphorescence, bioluminescence. He didn't power the light, Cale, Croft said, his mind reeling from the genius of it. He created it, a chemical reaction. He found a way to make a cold light bright enough for the lens. But the message, Cale said, the Morse code, how? Croft pointed to the shutter. It too was connected to the clockwork, a separate, smaller set of gears with a disc. On the disc were pegs like a music box. As the disc turned, the pegs tripped a lever which opened and closed the shutter. He encoded it, Croft said. He built a machine that would send a single word, over and over, as long as the weights were falling. Crow OKFT looked out the window at the grey, indifferent sea. Thomas Anstey, a man who knew his heart was failing, a man who was building this, a final, mechanical message. He knew he was going to die, sir, Cale asked, her voice trembling again. He built this, to name his. No, Croft said, his voice quiet. He looked at the machine. It was a work of genius, a work of art, but it was flawed. He didn't build this to send a message after he died, Croft said. He built this as a test, the logbook, a final test tonight. He set the machine in motion. He went downstairs to his desk to watch it from the shore, to document it, and then his heart, it failed. He paused, the wind moaning against the glass. But that, Cale said, her voice a thin thread, that means Stavros, it isn't the name of his killer. No, Croft agreed, his gaze fixed on the slow, meticulous and brilliant machine. I think it's the name of his invention. A cold, heavy silence settled in the room, broken only by the steady, hypnotic creak of the gears and the soft, rhythmic click, click, click of the last, lonely message of Thomas Anstey. The last Morse code, Chapter 2, the Stavros configuration. The revelation in the lantern room settled over Inspector Simeon Croft with a profound, cold weight. The rhythmic, mechanical click of the shutter and the steady, silent creak of the gears was no longer a frantic plea for help. It was a soliloquy. It was the sound of a brilliant, lonely mind performing its final, automated act. Thomas Anstey was not a victim of a killer named Stavros. Thomas Anstey was the creator of a machine he had named Stavros. Croft stood by the massive, rotating lens, the brilliant, cold chemical light washing over his face in a silent, hypnotic pulse. The wind moaned outside, a deep, bass counterpoint to the high, precise click of the mechanism. Sir, Constable Cale's voice was a thin, human sound in the mechanical chamber. If it's not a killer's name, then what? What does it mean? Why that word? Croft's gaze drifted from the machine to the technical logbook on the desk. The pages were filled with Anstey's neat, precise script, chemical formulas, gear ratios, and in the margins, philosophical musings. Stavros, Croft murmured, his gloved finger tracing the name on the cover. It's Greek, sigma tau alpha epsilon rho omicron sigma. It means cross, as in the cross of the crucifixion, a symbol of a burden, of sacrifice. He looked at the vast, complex and beautiful machine that Anstey had built. He thought of the man's failing heart, the medication in his cabinet. He wasn't building a machine, Constable. He was building his legacy, his monument, a machine that could run without him, a cross he had to bear, perhaps, the burden of his own genius, his own isolation. Croft turned his attention back to the mechanism, the Stavros configuration, as he now thought of it. It was a masterpiece of Victorian-era engineering, reborn. The weight-driven clockwork was flawless. The light, that was the true miracle. He looked closer at the lamp. It was not a single bulb, but but a cluster of thick, crystal tubes arranged like the pipes of an organ. Inside, a pale, viscous liquid seemed to move, swirling with a faint internal luminescence. The light it produced was not a hot, yellow glow, but a cold, brilliant, almost blue-white light. It was alive. Bioluminescence, he said, tapping the logbook. He was a chemist. He wasn't just a mechanic. He stabilized a phosphorescent chemical reaction. A cold light, he calls it, something that can burn, or rather glow, for days, not hours, without heat, without electricity. This then was the secret. This was the invention, a self-powering, self-rotating, automated lighthouse, a beacon that required no fuel, no grid, no human hand, other than a weekly winding. It was revolutionary. It was, Croft thought, priceless. And Thomas Anstey had died, of natural causes, on the very night of its final test. It's a tragedy, Cale whispered, seeming to read his thoughts. He completed his life's work, and then, just, died before he could tell anyone. Did he? Croft said, his voice quiet. He walked back to the spiral staircase. Let's re-examine the scene of his natural death with new eyes. They descended the iron steps, the mechanical creak and click fading above them, replaced once more by the low, mournful howl of the wind at the tower's base. They returned to the cottage. The room was just as they had left it, cold, still, and orderly. Thomas Anstey was still slumped at his desk, his head on his logbook, the picture of a man overcome by a sudden, fatal heart attack. Croft stood over the body, his gaze no longer just on the victim, but on the scene. He was no longer looking for a murderer. He was looking for a motive. If this was a natural death, his job was over, but the coroner had felt it was wrong. And now, so did Croft. Why? The light constable, Croft said. He named his machine, he wrote about it, he was proud, he was a recluse, yes, but an inventor, an artist. He wants an audience, he needed to tell someone. Croft's gaze fell on a telephone, an old, black, rotary-dial telephone, the kind that hadn't been used on the mainland in 20 years. The island has no power, Cale, but it's a landline, does it? It does, sir, she said. Submarine cable, dead, of course. The storm, it snapped. It yesterday, that's why he couldn't call for help when his heart gave out. Or perhaps he did calls for help, Croft mused, but before the line went dead. He looked at the open logbook again. The final entry, the mechanism is complete, a final test tonight. He looked at the man's hand resting on the page. His fingers were ink-stained. His pipe, Croft said, pointing to the cold pipe in the heavy glass ashtray. It's unsmoked. The bowl. It's full of fresh tobacco. He packed it. He prepared to sit here to write his notes to watch his creation flash across the sea. But he never lit it. He leaned closer to the body, his gaze precise. He died in the act of sitting down. He set down his pen. He reached for his pipe and then he died instantly. A massive coronary, Cale offered. It happens like that. As Croft agreed, but what caused it? A man with a known condition. He had his medication. He knew his limits. This machine. It wasn't as a stress. It was as a triumph. He should have been celebrating. Croft's eyes scanned the desk. The logbook, the ink pot, the pipe, the ashtray, and a mug, a heavy ceramic mug. It was half full of cold tea. He was celebrating, Croft said, his voice a low, cold whisper. He wound his machine. He started his light he came down he made his tea he packed his pipe he sat down he took a drink of tea. He looked at the man's blue lips, the faint, quiet look of surprise on his face. This wasn't a heart attack, Cale Croft said. This was a poison. He pointed the tea he drank it and seconds later he died instantly. Something fast, something violent, something that mimics as a coronary something like potassium chloride or digitalis from his own heart, medication and overdose. The room was suddenly colder, the silence no longer peaceful but murderous. But who? Kel whispered, her hand instinctively going to her radio. We're alone here. The storm. No boat could land here. We barely made it and the generator. It's cold. No one has been here. Haven't they? Croft said. His gaze moved from the desk to the floor to the door, the threshold. There on the clean stone floor was a single dark and wet footprint. It was not his. It was not Cale's. It was larger, a work boot and fresh. The water from the storm. It hadn't evaporated yet. Croft looked at Cale, his eyes cold, precise. We aren't alone, Constable. Someone was here. Someone came in this storm. Someone knew about the tea. Someone knew about his heart and someone is still on this island. Chapter 3: The Second Footprint. The discovery of the footprint shattered the island's illusion of solitude. The Skein was no longer a relic, a monument to one man's lonely genius. It was a cage, a cold, black rock, 3 miles from shore, in a rising gale with a killer. Inspector Croft's movements remained slow, methodical, but they were now infused with a new, cold urgency. He stepped back from the cottage, his eyes scanning the wet, rocky ground between the doorway and the tower base. He went to the generator room, Croft stated, his voice a low hum against the rising wind. He pointed. A second partial print and a third faint scuff, leading directly to the heavy iron door of the engine room. But why, sir? Cale asked, her hand now resting on the grip of her holstered sidearm. The generator, it's dead. The fuel, it's gone. What was he looking for? He wasn't looking for anything, Croft said. He was sabotaging. He was ensuring that Anstey was truly alone. He poisoned. There's the tea he knew about. There's the storm he knew. It snapped. There's the phone line and he drained. There's the generator, fuel too. To make certain that Anstey had no power, no radio, no way to call for help. The killer had been methodical. He had planned for every contingency. He had, Croft realized, orchestrated a perfect death, a death that would be ruled natural. A recluse, a bad heart, a storm, no power. It was flawless. Except for one brilliant and terrible mistake. He didn't know about STAVROS, Croft whispered, a cold, grim respect in his voice. He thought that by killing, there's the power he was killing, there's the light he had no ideas that Anstey had created as a machine that needed no power. The killer had, in his meticulous effort to ensure silence, accidentally allowed Anstey's true legacy to shine. A massive, automated, power-free beacon, flashing a word he thought was a secret. The light, Cale breathed, her eyes wide with the realization. The killer he sees it, he knows, we're here, he knows, it's flashing, he knows, his secret is out. The island was no longer just a cage, it was a trap, and they were in it with him. The wind howled, a rising shriek that seemed to mock them. Where is he, sir? Cale asked, her voice tight, her eyes scanning the jagged black rocks that ringed the small compound. There's nowhere to hide, the boat shed. Croft shook his head. We saw the boat shed when we landed. It's empty, the davits. They're rusted. He didn't come in his own boat. Then how? He came with Anstey, Croft stated, the logic cold and clear. He was a guest or a partner. He was invited. He helped him build it. He knew his habits. He knew his medication. He knew his routine. The victim and the killer, alone on a rock building a masterpiece, and then a betrayal, a cup of tea. But his boat, sir, Cale insisted. Where is his boat? It doesn't exist, Croft said. He came with Anstey, but he planned to leave with us or with you. He would have hidden. He would have waited for the storm to pass. He would have let you find the body. He would have emerged as a second survivor, a grieving partner. He would have told you about the tragic accident. But the light had changed everything. The flashing STAVROS had turned his perfect natural death into a mystery. It had brought Croft, and now the killer was not a survivor. He was trapped, and he knew it. He's here, Cale whispered, her hand tightening on her weapon. He's watching us. Yes, Croft said. He looked at the cottage, the tower, the small, cold engine room. He needs to silence that light. It's his accuser. It's the only witness, and we are in his way. The island was a chessboard, 3 pieces, the killer, Cale, and himself, and the lighthouse. The lighthouse was the prize. We split up, Cale suggested, her police training kicking in. I take the outbuildings, the shed, you clear the tower. No, Croft said, his voice firm. It was the absolute wrong move. That is what he wants. He is one man. We are two. We stay together. He is in one of 3 places: the cottage, the engine room, or the tower. He's not in the cottage, Cale said. We were just there. We check it again, Croft said, his own movements now deliberate. Methodical. We clear it, then thus the engine room, then thus the tower. He is in thus the tower, Cale. I know it. He's up there. He's trying to stop thus the machine. They moved to the cottage, Cale with her torch beam cutting the gloom, her weapon drawn, Croft just behind, his eyes, his mind scanning, absorbing. The cottage was empty, the body was still there. The cold tea, the unsmoked pipe, nothing had changed. They moved to the connecting walkway, to the heavy iron door of the engine room. Croft pushed it open, the smell of cold diesel and rust, the massive, silent generator, the dead batteries. Clear, Cale said, her voice echoing slightly in the chamber. But Croft's eyes were on the floor. He pointed his torch. There, near the base of the massive, silent generator, was a small, dark and oily rag, and beside it, a wrench. He wasn't just draining the fuel, Croft said. He was sabotaging the engine. He was ensuring it could never be started again. But sir, he's gone, Cale said, her torch playing over the empty corners. Yes, Croft said, he's gone, up. Croft's gaze was fixed on the far wall. There was another door, not the one to the cottage, but a small, low iron hatch one he hadn't noticed before. It was unbolted. Where does that lead? Cale asked. Croft didn't need to guess. He knew. It leads to the weight shaft, the clockwork, the guts of the tower. He's not going up the main stairs. He's climbing the machine itself. He was the partner. He knew the machine as well as Anstey. He's above us, Croft said, his voice a low, cold whisper, and he has a wrench. Chapter 4, The Sound of Stopping. The tower was no longer a beacon. It was a vertical battlefield, a column of stone, wind, and iron, with a desperate man hidden somewhere in its mechanical heart. Inspector Croft and Constable Cale stood in the cold, diesel-scented air of the engine room, their gaze fixed on the small, low iron hatch. It was barely 2 feet square, a dark mouth leading into the unknown. Creak, creak, creak. From above, from within the walls, came the steady, rhythmic sound of the machine, the turning of the great lens, the slow, patient descent of the counterweights. He's in there, sir, Cale whispered, her weapon now held in a 2-handed, steady grip. He's in the shaft. He knows. The machine, Croft said, his mind working, visualizing the blueprints he had seen in his mind. The weight shaft, it runs the entire height of the tower from the lantern room to here. It's how he would have wound it. He and Anstey it must have rungs, a ladder. He's climbing to stop it, Cale said, but how? By cutting the cable. Oh, Croft breathed, the horror of the idea striking him. That would destroy it. The weights, they must weigh a ton. If he cuts the cable, the whole thing, it crashes the lens. It shatters. He's not a vandal. He's a partner. He helped build this. He doesn't want to destroy it. He wants to silence it. He pointed up. He's going for the escapement, the clockwork in this lantern room. He will jam the gears with that wrench. He will stop the rotation. He will stop the message. Then we have to beat him there, Cale said, moving toward the main spiral staircase. He has a head start, Croft said, following his pace measured, not frantic. But we have the stairs. He has a vertical ladder in the dark. We will be faster. They entered the base of the tower. The wind howled, a spiraling vortex of sound that filled the column. Croft took the lead, his torch beam cutting the darkness, his feet finding the iron steps in a steady, rhythmic and quiet thud, thud, thud. Cale was behind him, her own torch playing on the walls, her weapon pointed up into the spiraling gloom. They climbed 10 steps, 20, the air grew colder, the sound of the wind grew louder, a physical pressing force, and underneath it they heard it. Clang, clang, clang. A metal on metal sound from inside the wall. It was the killer climbing his boots on the iron rungs of the shaft. He was above them. He's fast, Cale panted, the climb already taxing her. He's desperate, Croft said, his own breathing deep. Even he did not stop. His rhythm was unbroken. Thud, thud, thud. Clang, clang, clang. The two sounds, a dreadful ascending duet, the hunter and the hunted. 50 steps, 70. The air was frigid. The world was a spiral of darkness, wind, and the sound of their own progress. And then a new sound. Screech, thump, clang, clang, clang. A terrible metallic protest. The climbing sound from inside the wall, it stopped. It was replaced by a scraping, a frantic scrabbling. He slipped, Cale yelled, her voice snatched by the wind. The wrench, Croft shouted, not stopping. He dropped the wrench. Clang, 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 clang. The sound of the heavy tool falling down the vast, dark, vertical shaft. It bounced from side to side, a terrible, percussive roll. It seemed to last forever. And then, crash. A final echoing impact as it hit the bottom, the engine room floor. Followed by silence. A new kind of silence. Croft stopped. He froze, his foot in midair. Sir, Cale whispered, nearly colliding with his back. Listen, Croft breathed. The wind was there, the sea was there. But the machine was not. The steady creak of the gears. It had stopped. The click of the shutter. It was gone. Croft's blood ran cold. He looked up through the gloom. He could just see the lantern room far above them. The light. It was on a steady, unblinking, silent beam. Though the wrench, Croft whispered, the terrible, brilliant, and accidental logic of it hitting him. It didn't just fall. It hit. There's the mechanism at the bottom. It hit. There's the main drive. It jammed the gears. He did it by accident. He stopped the message. A thud from above inside the wall. The scrabbling sound had stopped. He's climbing again, Cale said, her voice tight. He knows it stopped. He's climbing out to the lantern room to us. No, Croft said. He started to climb again, faster. He's not climbing out. He's climbing down. He heard the crash. He knows what happened. He's going down to fix it. Croft's mind, it was racing. The light. It is steady. The message is gone. Our only witness is silent, and we are halfway up a dark tower in a storm with a killer who is now below us, and we have to go through him to get out. The Last Morse Code, Chapter 5, The Iron Descent. The silence in the tower was a new, suffocating presence. The wind had not died. It seemed to howl louder now, a predatory shriek that rushed in to fill the vacuum left by the machine. The steady, rhythmic creak of the gears, which had been the lighthouse's heartbeat, was gone. The hypnotic click of the shutter had vanished. There was only the wind and the sound of 2 pairs of feet on the iron stairs. Inspector Simeon Croft began the descent. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step placed with a quiet, practiced precision. He held his torch aimed down, cutting a small, pale circle in the vast, spiraling darkness. The beam illuminated the iron step below him, then the next, then the next. It was a descent into a well. Behind him, Constable Cale followed, her own torch pointed up, watching their backs, though the only thing above them was the empty, silent lantern room, its cold light now spilling, unblinking, out into the storm. The situation had inverted terribly. Moments ago, they were the hunters ascending toward a man trapped at the top. Now they were the prey. The killer was at the bottom, in the engine room, between them and their only exit. He was a man who had murdered once, had been sabotaging the generator, and was now cornered. He had his wrench back. Croft's mind worked with a cold, clear logic. The killer The partner knew the tower as well as Anstey. He had been climbing the weight shaft, a route Croft and Cale hadn't even known existed. He was comfortable in this vertical, mechanical world. He was, in effect, the island's new keeper. They descended past the halfway point. The air grew thicker, heavier, tasting more of the cold, damp stone and the faint, metallic scent of the engine room below. The howl of the wind was slightly muffled here, but the sense of being inside the storm, encapsulated in the stone column, was absolute. Croft paused. He held up a hand. Cale stopped instantly, her breathing shallow. He clicked off his torch. The world vanished. They were plunged into an absolute primal blackness, the kind of darkness that felt heavy, that pressed against the eyes. "Sir," Cale's whisper was tiny, barely audible. "Listen," Croft breathed. He strained his ears, separating the sounds, the roar of the wind, the distant crash and hiss of the waves against the rocks far below, and another sound. From the engine room, from the bottom of the well. A scrape, a heavy, metallic drag. The killer was not cowering, he was not waiting, he was working, he was dragging something. Croft clicked his light back on. The sudden, pale circle was a shock. He continued down, faster now, but no less quiet. The sound of the scraping stopped. The killer had heard them. He knew they were coming. Croft reached the bottom of the spiral staircase. He stood on the stone floor of the tower's base. The space was circular, empty, the walls slick with damp. Two heavy, arched doorways led off it, one back to the cottage where Anstey's body lay, the other to the engine room. The engine room doorway was a rectangle of absolute, impenetrable black. The killer was in there, waiting. Croft motioned with his hand. Cale understood. She aimed her torch and her weapon directly at the doorway. He, in turn, aimed his own torch at the ceiling, bouncing the light, illuminating the area indirectly, creating a wider, more diffused, and less targetable glow. "You are in a sealed room." Croft's voice was not a shout. It was a calm, resonant statement, and the stone walls carried it perfectly. "There is no exit. The Osprey is our boat. The radio is on our boat. The storm will not break for at least 12 hours. We are the only people who know you are here." Silence, only the wind. "We know what you did, Mr. STAVROS," Croft said. The name from the machine, dropped into the cold air like a stone. And from the darkness of the engine room, a new sound, a low, bitter and shaking chuckle. "You think you know," a voice rasped, rough with anxiety and cold. "You don't know anything, Inspector. He named it after me." The darkness moved. A figure stepped into the diffused light of the doorway. He was a man in his 40s, with a thick, dark beard and the powerful, worn-down build of a man who works with his hands. He was dressed in heavy, dark oilskins. His face was pale, his eyes burning with a furious, desperate intelligence. He was holding the heavy, oil-stained wrench, not as a weapon, but as a scepter. "My name is STAVROS," he said, the adrenaline of the situation making his voice tight. "Stavros Kourakis, and that old fool." He named his precious machine after his partner. He was not just a killer, he was the witness, he was the accidental message. Anstey hadn't been sending a random word, he had been sending the name of his collaborator, and in death, that message had become his accusation. "You jammed it," Croft stated, his light steady. Stavros looked at his hands, at the wrench. "It slipped. The rung was wet. I dropped it. It broke the governor. It stopped. But it doesn't matter. The light is silent. Your message is gone." "We are the message now, Mr. Kourakis," Croft said. "We," and the half-full cup of cold tea on his desk. Stavros's face tightened. The mention of the tea, that small, domestic detail, seemed to hit him harder than the light. "He wouldn't listen," Stavros hissed, stepping fully out of the engine room. He was between them and the cottage. He was between them and the outside world. He was a dragon sitting on a treasure. That light, Inspector, that cold light. It's not just for lighthouses, it's everything. Power without fuel, light without heat. It could change the world, and he wanted to keep it, here on his rock, a hobby. He called it a hobby. The rage was rolling off him, a palpable, cold fury that filled the small space. He had not killed for money, Croft realized. He had killed for purpose, for the idea. "So you helped him build it?" Croft said, his voice a low, steady rhythm drawing the confession out. And you drain the generator to create the perfect stage. The storm, the broken line, the failed heart of a lonely old man. He was a fool, Stavros shouted, his voice cracking, echoing in the stone shaft. He was in the way. I gave him his medicine, all of it, in his tea, a clean end, a sleep. It was a mercy, and then this light, this message. He couldn't just die, he had to talk, even from the grave. He raised the wrench, and now you know, and you're in the way too. He was tensed, ready to spring, not at Croft but at Cale, the one with the gun. Croft didn't move, he didn't raise his voice, he just spoke. "And what will you do now, Stavros?" he asked, his voice a cold, curious, and utterly calm whisper. "The machine is broken, the light is on, it's steady, it's not a message anymore, it's just a lighthouse, it's a beacon. And in this storm, a steady light from a decommissioned tower is just as loud as a word. It screams, I am here. It screams something is wrong. You haven't silenced him, Mr. Kourakis, you have just made him louder." Stavros froze, the wrench in his hand felt suddenly heavy and useless. Croft's logic, his quiet, inescapable words, had done what a bullet could not. They had disarmed him. He hadn't silenced the witness. He had just changed its testimony, and it was still talking. The last Morse code, Chapter 6, The Weight of Genius. The standoff in the tower base held for a long, cold moment. The only sounds were the shriek of the wind outside and the heavy, ragged breathing of Stavros Kourakis. The wrench was still in his hand, but the fire in his eyes had been banked, replaced by the cold, grey ash of realization. Croft's words had been a mirror, showing him not a triumphant liberator of genius, but a clumsy, cornered murderer whose every move had made his situation worse. He had poisoned Anstey to silence him, but Anstey's machine had given him a voice. He had climbed the tower to silence the machine, but his own panic had only broken its message, turning it into a steady, brilliant beacon that was, as Croft said, screaming wrong to the entire North Sea. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Stavros whispered. The wrench, his last symbol of defiance, slipped from his fingers. It hit the stone floor not with a defiant clang, but with a dull, heavy, and final thud. The fight was gone. There was only the weight of what he had done. "He trusted you," Croft said, his voice a low, steady, and rhythmic murmur. It was the rhythm of a slow tide, inescapable, wearing away the man's defenses. "He named his life's work after you." This final fact seemed to be the blow that shattered Stavros's composure. A dry, racking sob escaped him. "I loved him," Stavros said, his voice breaking. "He was my teacher, my friend, but he couldn't see. He was selfish. He built a miracle and he wanted to hide it from a world that needed it. He was a keeper, and I am a builder. He saw a hobby, I saw the future." "And you took it," Cale said, her voice sharp, cutting through the man's self-pity. Her gun had not wavered. Stavros looked at her, then at Croft. He seemed in that moment to shrink. The powerful, furious engineer was gone, replaced by a tired, cold, and defeated man. He slowly, deliberately, slid the heavy wrench across the stone floor with his foot. It grated loudly, coming to a stop near Croft's boot. "The storm," Stavros said, his voice empty. "It's getting worse. You can't take me back, not tonight." "No," Croft agreed. "We can't. We will wait for the dawn." "The light," Stavros murmured, and a new, different kind of panic entered his voice. He looked up, his gaze directed at the ceiling, toward the top of the tower. "It's on, but the mechanism, it's jammed, the weight, the wrench, it didn't break the main gear, it just wedged it, it's stopped. The lens, it isn't turning." "And," Croft asked, sensing this was not just an observation. "You don't understand," Stavros said, the engineer suddenly overriding the killer. "A Fresnel lens, it focuses, it's a magnifying glass. Anstey's cold light, it's cold, yes, but it's energy, millions of candle power. If the lens doesn't rotate, it focuses that beam on one spot. The shutter mechanism, the interior wall, it will burn. The whole lantern room will go up." Croft and Cale exchanged a look. It was a plausible, terrifying thought. "He's lying," Cale said, her voice flat. "He's trying to get to the machine." "Am I?" Stavros pleaded, his eyes wide. "The whole thing is made of brass, crystal, and old oiled wood. The shutter I built is painted black lacquer to absorb light. It will heat up. It will scorch. It will catch fire. He built in a failsafe for the rotation, a cutoff, but I broke the failsafe when I jammed the main drive. It will burn, Inspector, the whole thing, his life's work. Croft was still. He tilted his head, listening. He could hear the howl of the wind coming down the spiral staircase, and on it he could smell it, faint, so faint it was almost imaginary, a thin, acrid scent, the smell of hot paint. Stavros was telling the truth. "We have to put it out," Stavros said, his voice desperate. "We have to kill the light, please. Inspector, I murdered him, but this invention, it shouldn't die too. It deserves to live. He would have wanted that." Croft stood in the cold, dark tower base, the howl of the wind his only counsel. He had his confession. He had his killer. The island was secure, but the invention, Anstey's legacy, was in danger. "How?" Croft asked. "How do we put it out? The reaction is chemical." "The canisters," Stavros said, standing up slowly, his hands open, showing he was no longer a threat. "In the lantern room, we have to separate them. There are two compounds, A and B. They mix in the central chamber. I can stop the flow. I can drain the chamber. It will go dark. Instantly, please, let me save it. It's all that's left of him, of us." Croft made his decision. "Constable Cale, you will escort Mr. Kourakis to the lantern room. Your weapon on him at all times. He will not touch anything but the canisters. He will shut down the light. Then you will bring him back down. I will be in the cottage. I will be documenting the primary scene. We will secure him there. Am I clear?" "Sir, yes, sir," Cale said, her voice firm. She trusted his judgment. "Stavros," Croft said, his voice a cold command. "You will do exactly as Cale says. You will not make a sound she doesn't like. You will save your machine, and then you will tell me everything about how you built it, and why you threw it all away for a cup of tea." Stavros nodded, the last of his resistance gone, replaced by a singular, focused, and grieving purpose. He had to save the light. The climb back up the spiral stairs was a funereal procession. Cale went first, her torch and weapon steady. Stavros followed, his hands clasped behind his head, his steps heavy. Croft came last, his own light on the prisoner, his mind a cold, clear engine of observation. The tower was different now. The silence was absolute, the lack of the machine's creak, a profound emptiness. The only sound was their own slow, rhythmic footsteps on the iron. They reached the lantern room. Croft pushed the door open. The air was thick with the sharp, choking smell of burning lacquer. The room was still. The massive Fresnel lens was motionless, a silent crystal giant, and the light was, as Stavros had warned, terrifying. It was no longer a sweeping, ethereal beam. It was a single, concentrated, and absolutely silent shaft of brilliant, cold fire. It was aimed directly at the now stationary shutter mechanism. And from that spot, a thin, lazy curl of black smoke was rising, twisting in the air. They were not too late, but they were, perhaps, only seconds away. Title: The Last Morse Code, Chapter 7, The Keeper's Log. The climb back up the spiral stairs was a funereal procession. Cale went first, her torch beam cutting the dark, her weapon held in a steady, two-handed grip. Stavros followed, his hands clasped high on his head, his steps heavy with the gait of a man already in chains. Inspector Croft came last, his own torch beam fixed on the prisoner's back, his mind a cold, clear engine of observation. The tower was different now. The silence was absolute, the lack of the machine's creak, a profound, unsettling emptiness. The only sound was their own slow, rhythmic footsteps on the iron, a dull, metallic march ascending into the darkness. They reached the lantern room. Croft pushed the door open, and the smell hit them like a physical force, a sharp, acrid, and choking scent of superheated paint and scorching oil. The room was still. The massive Fresnel lens, a silent, crystal giant, was motionless, and the light was, as Stavros had warned, terrifying. It was no longer a sweeping, ethereal beam. It was a single, concentrated, and absolutely silent shaft of brilliant, cold fire. It was aimed directly at the now stationary shutter mechanism. And from that spot, a thick, greasy curl of black smoke was rising, twisting in the air. The black lacquer on the shutter was blistering and peeling, and the wood beneath it was beginning to glow a dull, angry red. Go, Croft ordered, his voice calm, cutting through the tension. With Cale's gun steady on his back, Stavros moved to the base of the lamp. He did not seem to register the threat of the weapon. His eyes were fixed, in a kind of agony, on the damage. He was an engineer, a creator, watching his own child in peril. His hands, though caked in the grime of the weight shaft, moved with the innate, practiced grace of a surgeon. He turned a small, spoked brass wheel. There was a low hiss of escaping pressure. He unclipped two thick, reinforced hoses from their ports. He opened a final, heavy release valve. There was a low, liquid gurgle. And the light, it died. It did not flicker, it did not fade, it simply ceased. It was as if a switch had been thrown on a star. The room was plunged into an impossible, sudden darkness, lit only by their three torch beams, which seemed weak and yellow by comparison. The glowing red ember on the shutter mechanism cooled, subsided, and went dark. The silence was total. The machine was stopped. The light was dead. The island was truly, finally dark. "It's safe," Stavros whispered. He leaned his forehead against the cold, dark brass of his invention, and for a moment his shoulders shook. The engineer had saved his creation. The murderer had nowhere left to hide. They took him down, back through the spiraling dark, the wind seeming to howl in triumph at the tower's new, quiet state. They returned to the cottage. The storm raged outside, a wild, elemental force, but inside the small, stone room, a new, heavy stillness had fallen. They secured Stavros to the heavy, iron cot in the corner of the room, his hands cuffed. He was compliant, his energy spent. The adrenaline, the rage, the fear, it had all drained out of him, leaving an empty, exhausted husk. The engineer in him was satisfied. The murderer was all that was left. Cale stood watch by the door, her face illuminated by the glow of her lantern. The long, cold night had truly begun. Croft turned his attention away from the living and back to the man who could no longer speak. He sat in the chair opposite the dead keeper. Thomas Anstey was still slumped at his desk, his head resting on the open logbook, a cold, silent testament to the room's terrible, quiet violence. Croft looked at the small, domestic details of the betrayal. The cold, unsmoked pipe, the heavy mug, half full of poisoned tea. "He welcomed you," Croft said, his voice not for Stavros, but for the room, for Anstey. "He made you tea. He was going to sit and share his triumph with you, his partner, his friend." From the corner, Stavros said nothing. His quiet, muffled sobs were his only reply. Croft gently, with his gloved hand, looked at the logbook. The last entry in Anstey's neat, meticulous script was at the bottom of the page. "The mechanism is complete. A final test tonight." But beneath it, there was something else. It was not Anstey's writing. It was a frantic, scrawled pencil mark. A mark made, not in the dark, but by a dying hand. Anstey, in the last, agonizing seconds of his life, as the poison seized his heart, he had not been able to speak. He could not stand. But his hand, his ink-stained, capable hand, had found a pencil. He had not had the strength to write a name. The light, flashing STAVROS outside, was already doing that. He had drawn a symbol, a simple, almost childish drawing. A circle, and inside it another, smaller circle, and beside it another circle, and a small arrow pointing from one to the other. Croft's blood ran cold. He knew what it was. He had just seen it in the lantern room. It was a diagram, a schematic. He looked at the mug of poison. He looked at the symbol. He knew, Croft breathed, his voice filled with a terrible, sad, and dawning respect. He tasted it. He knew it was the medication. He knew you had done it. And he knew in that second that he was dying. The symbol, it was a diagram of the canisters. The A and B compounds of the cold light. The arrow, it was the flow. He was showing how they mixed. This wasn't a confession," Croft said, his voice a low whisper. "This wasn't an accusation. He knew he was dying. He knew his light was on. He knew it was flashing his last, great secret to the world. And this was his last word, his final instruction." Croft looked at Stavros, who had fallen silent, listening. In his final second, his only thought was not of his killer, it was of his invention. He was afraid. He was afraid it would be found and that no one would know how to stop it. He was afraid it would burn itself out. Croft pointed to the scrawled, simple drawing. He was telling us how to turn it off. In his last, fading moment of consciousness, Thomas Anstey's final act had been one of pure, protective genius. His only thought was for his legacy, his light. Croft gently closed the logbook. The case was over. He sat in the cold, stone room, the murderer weeping quietly in the corner, the victim a silent, peaceful shape at the desk. He listened to the sound of the storm, a wild, chaotic, and elemental force, and he thought of the brilliant, silent machine waiting patiently in the darkness above, waiting for the world to be ready for its light.